going.
I am.
Okay, well,
let's see. Nora, can you unmute yourself and welcome them? Because I'm echoing too, and I will try to dial back in.
Sure, great. Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. This is Nora Rassman. I'm the campaign coordinator with Standing on the Side of Love, and we are so thrilled to have you with us. We have 97 folks online and still more folks joining us. So thanks so much for everyone that's here. This is an invitation for everyone to hit *6 when you join us, in case you haven't already. Got it. All right.
Welcome to the meeting.
Welcome.
26. Thank you.
So I believe someone is calling on the phone and on the computer. Our apologies, but please make sure *6. Great. So we're so happy to have you all here with us. We're here with Jova Lynne and Kenny Wiley, who are some organizer, activist, leaders, UU young adults who have really been doing some awesome work around racial justice throughout their lives, and specifically within the framework of the Black Lives Matter movement. So why don't we go ahead and just get started. Again, my name is Nora, and I'm the campaign coordinator with Standing on the Side of Love. And Jen Toth, our campaign manager, is back. So she's going to say greetings, and then we're going to turn it over to the speakers. Jen?
Sorry about that, everyone. Sometimes we did a tech run through and everything was fine, and then it always crashes right beforehand. Anyhow, we are so grateful to have you all here. It looks like we have 125 folks and rising. So I think that really speaks to the interest in this issue. And I think that Nora has already introduced Jova and Kenny. So why don't we dive right in? And Jova, if you would want to start with yourself and just a little bit about your involvement in the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yes, I can definitely do that. Hi, everybody. I know I can't see you, but I see the numbers rising, and it's pretty amazing that so many people wanted to join us today. So thank you so much for being a part of this. So my name is Jova, and I am a lifelong UU. I'm originally from New York City, where I am a member of the Community Church of New York, which is in Midtown Manhattan. But I currently live and work in the Bay Area, San Francisco. So right now, my paid work is at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, which is a contemporary arts institution where I'm the youth arts manager, and I run a arts of activism program for Bay Area youth, amongst many other things that I do. So a lot of my work is really centered in art and activism. And so I currently live in Oakland, where I have been organizing with a group, and you can see us on the screen over here. This is some of us, called Black Brunch. And so, or the group is actually unnamed, but the tactic that you all probably know the most about is Black Brunch. And so we're a group of younger folk who identify as Black or of the African diaspora. We're predominantly women and queer-centered, led, and we do a lot of direct action organizing. So we're usually on the ground doing several tactics that sort of uplift this struggle for Black life. So this photo that you're actually seeing now is from a moment where we worked with a coalition of folks from Asians for Black Life as well as white allies to shut down Oakland Police Department headquarters. And that happened, I believe, sometime in December. And so a lot of my work is rooted in not only doing education with youth and young people, but also really working with Black leadership to develop strategies so that we can really mobilize toward a future where Black lives matter. In addition to all this direct action organizing and education, I actually just got back from Selma, where I was with folks from Living Legacy project doing a bunch of art making. You can see this is a group that I'm in. We're called Whoa, with our ancestors' hands, and we make art that speaks to issues of Black life, and sort of engage with diverse communities to collaborate on these things. So when we were in Selma with Living Legacy, we were working on a collaborative mural where folks got to sort of share why they're here, what are we learning from Selma, and what are we giving back to Selma. So really all sorts of spectrums, from working with UUs, from working with non-UUs, working with diverse groups of folks. Really just, I feel like my whole life journey, especially right now, has led me to really think about ways we can radicalize our movements and center spirituality within that. So that's where I'm at. Kenny.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jova. Thanks so much for sharing. Kenny, would you want to do the same and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've gotten involved with the Black Lives Matter movement?
Of course. I hope my audio is all right. And thanks to all 148 of you who've joined us. This is really exciting. So my name is Kenny Wiley, and I serve as the Director of Faith Formation at Prairie UU here in Parker, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. I live in the Denver city limits. And I also work as a senior editor for UU World magazine. So I want to, as a way in, I want to talk about August 9th, 2014, which was the day that Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. And so I think, like Jova, I feel like my life has led me here. And what happened on that day for me was, I've been noticing things. I felt racism throughout my life and felt that though we've made progress as a country, there's so much more to be done. But what I found was that something shifted in my soul when they let Mike Brown lay in the street for 4.5 hours. And so for me, I was glued to Twitter, and I was watching that Saturday. Things were starting to escalate in Missouri, and I started to see solidarity rallies pop up. And so I searched on Twitter, maybe there's something going on in Denver. And I looked that evening, and there was nothing for Mike Brown or Ferguson in Denver. And I searched again an hour later, and I searched again. And about the 5th time I looked, I had this moment where I realized, oh, I think I know what this means. That this means that I'm supposed to do something. And so I did. I just remember that feeling of my hands hovering over the keyboard and feeling like if I send this tweet, hey, does anyone want to do a solidarity rally in Denver for Mike Brown and Ferguson? When I sent that tweet, I felt like my life would be a lot different. And in conjunction with there was the National Moment of Silence for victims of police brutality that later that week, and we had 140 people in Denver, and a march of 350 later that week, and on. And I found myself, I kept assuming that the old guard, the organizers who've been doing this for years, that they would at some point step in. I was just some guy who was concerned and worried and frustrated with all the violence. But I found myself as a leader, and within a couple months looked to as one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement in this city. And the reason I start with that story is that I think it speaks to what this movement is, which for me, it's a movement of people who have had enough, of people who feel like things need to change and they need to change now. And for me, to me, this is the ultimate manifestation of our UU values, of that if we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, that we should be able to say that Black Lives Matter. And so, I'm not a professional organizer, but we've led marches and vigils and forums and influencing legislation and on. And it just came from a group of people who found each other on social media. And I think it speaks to the power of what we're capable of. So I'll stop there for now and see where the discussion takes us. But for me, this is a religious calling.
Wonderful. Thanks to both of you. And finally able to join on video. So you both have already touched on some of these pieces, but I think we're just going to sort of open it up for a discussion for a little bit, and I'll throw some questions out there, and we can just kind of expand, and you guys can add in and riff off each other. So let's talk a little bit more deeply about what we mean when we say Black Lives Matter and who we're talking to when we say that.
Yeah. So I think that's a really big question that folks who I've been working with have been asking ourselves and each other, right? So Black Lives Matter again is a hashtag or a movement that was put together by 3 to 4 young queer Black women, right? As like a way to track what's happening in our communities. As Kenny said, the power of social media is so real for organizing these days. So really use it as a mechanism to bring people together, right, around a certain thing. And I think that when we say, sorry, I'm seeing people saying it's really hard to hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay. Is that better? Great. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
So I'm just going to hold on to my microphone then. So when we say Black Lives Matter, I think it's really important to center that Black life within a historical context, right? So Black folks as being folks who are disproportionately susceptible to state-sanctioned violence. So every 28 hours, a Black person is killed by a police officer, security guard, or vigilante. That's something that's a truly unique experience for Black people in this country, right? So I think that when we say Black Lives Matter, we're bringing a call to a humanizing an experience, right? So if we're the bodies that are on the line the most, if we're the people who are most susceptible to this violence, we therefore lose some sort of humanity, right? So when we say Black Lives Matter, it's a call to action. It's a call to say we are going to be in solidarity, if you're a non-Black person, with our brothers and sisters who are Black and mobilize community. I think if we looked at this in a historical context, even using the Voting Rights Act as an example, Black people gaining access to the right to vote, therefore trickles down into all folks of color getting access to the right to vote. And I think there's something really unique and beautiful about that. So when we say Black Lives Matter, we're not saying that all lives don't matter. We are saying actually all lives matter. So Black lives have to matter, and we're demanding that, right? So Black is definitely at the center because we haven't been at the center. And I think that's really important, especially if we look at how these things are happening all over the country and the globe. This isn't just an issue in Oakland. It's not just an issue in Denver. It's an issue everywhere all the time. And so Blackness being a way to unite around that. And I'm sure Kenny has more to add to that, but I'll just leave that there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jova.
Yeah, thanks, Jova. What I want to add is that, you know, we as UUs recently took a look back to 50 years ago, and the way in which that, you know, James Reeb was lifted up and that his death galvanized so many white people to act, and that we often lose sight even now of the fact that it was Jimmy Lee Jackson's death that spurred that initial call, and that so this movement is rooted in history, as Jova was saying, that Jimmy Lee Jackson's life was not as important to President Johnson as James Reeb's life. So really, in a lot of ways, this is the same story. And so what I also wanted to say is that I think a lot about this idea of respectability politics when Black Lives Matter comes up, and I want to take a sec to break that down. It's this idea that we as Black folks need to be respectable in our presentation, that our lives matter conditionally. So I grew up UU. I'm a lifelong Unitarian Universalist, and that I think most people will say, well, Kenny, you're a great guy, and you speak well, and you're educated, and all of these things, but what we're talking about is, to bring it back to UUism, we're talking about inherent worth. And, when some of these Black folks are killed, the questions that we as society ask, what were they doing? We try to make it seem like they deserved it. And what we're saying in this movement is that that if you stole cigarettes, or if you have a criminal record, or if you speak in AAVE, no matter what, your life is still important, and this person should not be dead. So when we say Black Lives Matter, we are saying that these matter unconditionally, as opposed to only if they speak well and smile all the time and went to college or grad school. That's what we're really getting at. And I think it's important as Unitarian Universalists and as people in this movement to lift that up over and over and over again.
Thank you, Kenny. Can we talk a little bit more? Uh-oh. Did my echo come back?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Well, I'll be quick. Can you talk a little bit more about how your faith has sort of shaped you, and what role you see your faith playing in the Black Lives Matter movement? Can we expand on that a little bit more? And if folks have questions, we're about to open it up to questions from the chat box, so please do type your questions in.
Well, Jova, I'll start this one if that's okay. So for me, as I said, I'm a lifelong UU, and my extended family on my dad's side, I'm a third generation UU. My grandmother found the UU Church as a Black woman in the 70s and loved it. And on my mom's side, there's a long history of me in the more traditional Black church tradition. And that means I feel at home in two places. I feel at home when I walk into a Black Christian church or in a Black space. I also feel at home when I I see people on the side, and I've been to some of these churches, people are lifting up, and I feel at home when I walk into that space as well. And the reason is because I feel theologically that this work is important, that what we say in every church every week about inherent worth and dignity, about the interconnected web, basically honoring the humanity of all people, I feel it in my bones that we as people of faith can do this. I also think that white supremacy and how it manifests itself in 2015, that it gets in our way as Unitarian Universalists, that so many of us are comfortable, so many of us are safe, we're privileged. And so this movement, my involvement, it comes from our values as professed, but not necessarily as lived. And I hope that we can get to the point where we live.
I'm hearing a bit of an echo.
Oh, I think that someone has unmuted themselves is what's happened. So if everyone who's on the phone can press *6 to mute themselves again, someone probably has this coming through their computer and their phone audio at the same time. And I think we may have just solved it. All right, that was quick. With 150 plus people, it's hard to keep the tech going, but we're doing it. So thank you, Kenny. So we have the questions pouring in. Jova, did you want to speak to that piece, and then I'll start reading off some of the questions we've got?
Definitely. So I am also a lifelong UU. I grew up at the Community Church of New York, and had been as a teenager, and I look super young, but I'm not that young, involved in YRUU, which is also known, for those of you who don't know, as Young Religious Unitarian Universalist. And so there was at the time, a national network of folks who were doing a lot of organizing. So not only youth development skills and trainings around spirituality, but really talking about social justice issues. What are the most important issues of our time, and really getting trained in those spaces on how to do that. So I was heavily involved in YRUU, heavily involved in drum, and really just was open my eyes to the possibilities of a better life for all of us. If we really could unpack all of these issues of our time, how can we really be living our spirituality? So that was a key question that I feel like kept coming up for me when I was involved in YRUU. And so as I merged into adulthood, I sort of had a moment where I, to be honest, sort of dipped out of UU life. I was like, I was a young person in this, a lot of transitionings were happening, I need to figure out who I am. And so I started doing a lot of organizing work. I was living in New York City and working with people who are formerly incarcerated, doing syringe exchange programs and harm reduction. And I was doing this work, and I said to myself, how did I get here? This is so random. My degree is in art and education. And so I did some reflection, and to be honest, I thought about the first General Assembly that I had been to as a young person, and actually Jason Leiden, who some of you might know, who does a lot of work around abolition, if you don't know him, you should, came up to me and was like, do you know that blank many people are incarcerated? At the time, this was several years ago, so I don't remember exactly what the number was. It's a lot more since then. And so I was thinking about this, and I was like, actually, everything I'm doing is directly related to the skills and my spirit that I've learned in YRUU and my spirituality and the things that my church taught me. And so leaving that job now that I'm older and in the Bay Area, I just keep returning to that. The things that I'm most passionate about are the things that I developed in church. And I feel like it is Assata Shakur says, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. And I feel like when I look at the 7 principles, I think of that freedom, and that it is certainly my duty to fight for my freedom. So that I definitely do this from an abolitionist standpoint, and we don't have to get into that right now. But I feel like the Black Lives Matter movement matters to me not only because it's my life and it's the life of my nieces and my nephews and my cousins and my sisters and my brothers, but it's all of our lives, right? If we don't fight for our freedom, then we'll never get that freedom. And so when I'm on the ground, when I'm envisioning what's the next tactic we're going to use, when I'm in these trainings and we're using consensus-based models, that's all soul work. And so it therefore is spiritual work. So I think what Kenny said is being at home wherever you are, in the UU Church, in the Black Church, there's home for us everywhere. And I think that comes from a very spiritual place.
Thank you. Beautifully said, both of you. Well, thank you all for asking some really great questions here and for allowing me to bring the questions to you. So I'll just dive in. What have you found to be the best way to engage with people who have, for whatever reason, remained on the sidelines? And that's from Audette in Wyoming.
Sorry, I lost you. Can you repeat that question?
Sure, yeah, sorry about that. What have you found to be the best way to engage with folks who have, for whatever reason, remained on the sidelines?
Well, what I'd say is that first of all, I get it. I think about what Malcolm X said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, that for us to keep in mind that everything we know, there was a time we didn't know it. And so for me, part of this is, even though it gets really frustrating to have the same Black Lives Matter, no All Lives Matter, no Black Lives Matter conversation over and over and over again, it's spiritually important for me to do that work, to engage people in this, because what I see is that we are all a part of this society, and we all are told some of the same things, that this idea that racism is over, or that there's nothing to worry about, or these people who have been killed, they must have deserved it. And so I think it's challenging people in a moral way, in a spiritual way to say that this is not as it seems in our society, and that we've been told something through media, through complacency, through a lot of things, and just doing the long, slow work of letting people know that actually we have so much more to do. And so, because I grew up, and the reason is personal. I grew up, as I said before, in comfort and with economic privilege. And so, even my family, there's a feeling for some of them that racism isn't a big deal anymore. And so I get that complacency. And so I let people know when I talk to them that I understand, but that we really must challenge each other to realize that there's so much to be done.
I would also say in terms of, so just to backtrack, the question around how do we activate people who aren't wanting to be involved or are afraid to maybe. I think that as an educator, I think a lot about that, right? So especially because I work with youth, I'm constantly engaging with people who don't really know how to engage or involve themselves. And so I think the first thing is to get politically educated yourself so that you feel really confident in what you're saying. I oftentimes find myself in debates where people are second guessing or questioning what I'm saying, and I think facts really, really help. The facts don't lie. So really, really being able to identify, okay, if I know I'm going into a space where these people don't agree, or maybe I have a loved one and I really want them to change their mind, having your facts ready, and then saying, okay, so these are the facts, and how does this relate to your heart work? How does this relate to your soul work? What are the core values in your life that you think these facts and knowing all of these things sort of inherently touch upon, right? So if my core value is that I believe everybody in the humanity of everybody, then I look at the facts of, okay, every 28 hours, that means that this person is being dehumanized, right? So bridging the facts with the spiritual simultaneously, I think really helps people get activated. I also think there's a lot of work happening everywhere. So really going on Twitter, hopping on the internet, creating a list with your friends of different resources or projects that are happening. People can just volunteer and meet folks and ask questions. There are people who are willing to have conversations with folks, and I think that also means letting go of fear, right? Fear often prevents us from doing the soul work because it's not easy. This work is so hard. Some days I wake up and I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this. This is the hardest thing every day to go out there and talk about and give life to. But I think it's walking towards that fear and letting the spirit drive you towards that fear that will help you engage with these folks and help get them activated, right?
And Jova, I just want to add a little bit more that part about courage and fear is so key. Especially, I think about every time I post something on Facebook, every time I go to a rally or speak or listen, what I hear or what I feel within is immense fear and concern that I people are going to disagree with me. And I think for those who want to activate others, being in touch with your own fear, and just being like, this is scary work, like Jova said, and then just finding a way, whatever your spiritual leanings or practices are, find a way to lean through that, to fight through that, and in ways to use it and to be honest with other people that you're feeling it. Because when we talk about fear, when we acknowledge it and then fight through it, that's when we start to make real change, because then we ourselves feel courageous.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions and comments coming through. I am sure this is a question you probably get asked a lot. And it's been asked in a couple different ways, but Debbie from Maryland asked, what is the most effective way for middle-aged white UUs to engage and energize others? I want to be an effective ally and help others to be effective as allies.
Again, I think this is where political education really can come through. I think folks, it's not only like, I feel like Black folks, we have a conversation in the group that I organize with in the Bay Area about how we know that our lives matter. How can we get buy-in from these people who are really anti-Black Lives Matter to work with us? And so one thing that I wish we had more of was political education of other white folks. And sometimes we have the capacity to do that, but sometimes we really don't. So what would it look like to start a study group or a reading group and create a resource that was written by white folks that included the voices of folks of color, but was written as like a toolkit to how to be a white ally so that folks had access to that information, right? I think a lot of folks sometimes just don't, they want to do the work but don't know how. So we need to give them the tools to know how. So if you're a middle-aged person who's with, I have 2 or 3 friends who are really jazzed about this, like get together, start a group, create a toolkit, and then go out into your communities and talk about it and share that, right? Whether it's via web or in person or on the phone. I think that is definitely a first and important step.
Thank you.
So something that I feel so strongly, and I know that the Denver Freedom Riders here in Colorado, we talk about this a lot, is that engagement, education, conversation, small groups, this is work. There are people who will disagree with me, but I believe this so strongly. I hear after every forum, I get asked this, I want to do something. And there are people doing legislation, there are people doing reform, and those things matter. But what we need most, I believe, is a radical shift in consciousness from those who are asleep. And that means those of us in groups of 5, of 8, of 15, of 30, waking each other up. And that's especially white folks. We have to wake each other up. And that happens in small spaces. That happens in conversations after church. That happens in these small ways. And so I want to say that many of you, I hear from a lot of you, I'm doing this group and only 7 people are showing up. Don't bash the work you're doing. And the second thing, when we had a pre-conversation and Jova said something amazing that I'm surprised she didn't say again, which is that there are people doing this work in every big city already. Most of the time, Black folks, as Jova said, queer folks, women, right? And get in touch with them so that, it's not just about a few national leaders like the movement 50 years ago. This is about people in individual cities and individual spaces doing the work. And so getting in touch and saying, hey, I'm here in Evanston or wherever you are, and saying, like, how can I and how can my group of 15, socially liberal white folks, how can we be of help to what you're already doing? Those are 2 huge things I think that can happen.
I also want to add that I think there are different ways to enter the conversation, right? So I don't think it's just about the supreme death, or as I like to call, I refer to it as genocide of our people. I don't think that's the only way. I think we need to look at prisons. We need to look at jails and that as a system, as a way to enter Black Lives Matter, look at disparities in healthcare, look at food justice, climate justice. There's many different ways that the conversation can really be activated. So I would also think about what are the issues that are most important to you, and how do those issues affect Black life as a strategy for educating others, right? So there's like a laundry list of things. It's not just the death, it's not just the murdering, it's not just the police, it's all of these things. Identify groups in your community that are doing that work, and then say, okay, how can this be a part of my toolkit? So maybe somebody knows, okay, I know Black Lives Matter, I know the police are killing these folks. What else can I do? It's that social issue and enter it in a different way.
In Denver, we talk about 4 kinds of resistance. We talk about resistance that's disruption, right? Civil disobedience, blocking streets, and that's important. We talk about protesting, using our voice, using signs. We talk about disruption that looks like life resistance, which is how do you serve money? Talking about education, right? And then the fourth way is collaboration, about connecting with. I've seen some people on the side talking about partnering with Black churches and Black organizations and letting them take the lead. So we talk about 4 kinds of resistance, and to me that's important because not all of us are people who feel comfortable or who feel able to go out and block traffic, but we want to engage in the Black Lives Matter movement, and we can do that through our economic decisions. We can do that through education. We can do that through holding signs and holding vigil. We can do that in so many ways. So I agree, Jova, that resistance is multifaceted. The most important thing is that we engage.
That is beautiful. Thank you. So many good questions coming in. Jolinda from Washington wants to hear a little bit more about your personal spiritual practices, I think, that seem to be the most effective in keeping you renewed and with an open heart.
So I think that's a really important question because burnout is real and we need our spirit in order to keep us moving forward. When I was in Selma recently, we had a few worship series and we heard from Unitarian ministers and non-UU ministers, and there kept being the return to this work isn't easy. You need to turn to something bigger than yourself to move you forward. So for me, myself, my mom is a UU minister. My aunt works for the UA. I'm constantly calling them to check in and to be like, hey, Mom, what do I do next? How can we, although my mom is not my minister, she is a minister, and she's got really great resources on sort of helping me tap in. I think that one thing that my group does is we always center. So we always do a call before we do any action, before we get any meeting started, before we go into small group planning. We do a call to the ancestors and really evoke those spirits to help guide us forward, because this work actually has been done before. We're just continuing that legacy, right? And so at the end of every action, we do that same work too, a prayer, offering. I'm really big on creating altars. So like remembering that I'm, again, walking in other people's footsteps and saying prayers to those folks. I also think that a part of my spirituality personally is being in conversation. So Grace Lee Boggs, who is this amazing activist based out of Detroit, she says that some of the most effective times for spirituality is having conversations. So something that I do beyond prayer, beyond calling on my family, beyond altars, is just setting aside time to have meaningful conversations with folks who maybe I don't even know a lot about. And part of this is that I'm in California and I'm really holding on to my New York church, so I don't go to church every Sunday, but I do try to be an intentional community with UUs outside of church and having those conversations. And I think that's really, and there's no shade or anything. I love the Oakland church. It's just my home is in New York, so that's where I'm at. And so I've really had to create my own kind of worship for myself.
Well, my answer is pretty similar to Jova's. Whenever we do an action, whenever we do a meeting, and we stop and we think about, when I think about Jimmy Lee Jackson, when I think about Ella Baker, when I think about James Reeb, Viola Liuzzo, right? When I think about these people, that grounds me, and that actually fills me with hope, because these people put so much on the line. And when I lift up in my mind or lift them up aloud at an action, it helps me be a little more courageous. It helps me be a little more persistent. It helps me do a little more work that day, however I'm feeling. And I don't really have, I could go into, I play Ultimate Frisbee. I do lots of things for myself spiritually, but in this work, when we're talking about this work, grounding it not only just in the people who've done this work before, but also lifting up the names of why we're doing this now. I think that's important to be said as well, that when I think about Mike Brown, and flawed though he was a person with inherent worth and dignity. When I think about all of the people who have died, who have been killed, that helps me fight through the fear and helps me be courageous.
Thank you.
One thing again that we always do is go back to that Assata quote, and Assata is still alive, Assata Shakur. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We have nothing to lose but our chains. When we did Black Brunch New York, that was a particularly challenging day for a lot of people, especially me. And so returning to that there are chains, and even though they're not physical for my personal life, they're there. And so what would it, I tried to also envision a future without them. And I think that's something that Spirit needs is to really be able to envision a world where that is just and that is fair. So I would encourage folks to tap into that practice of starting to visualize what could a world look like without all this violence.
I think maybe someone press *6 to mute themselves. Someone who has furry friends, we're hearing them in the background. So Leslie Mack, who I know helped found the Ferguson Response Network and Are You Awake, asked the question, do you think the Black Lives Matter movement should be part of spiritual life for all UUs? If yes, how is choice reconciled with that fact? And if no, why not?
Well, first of all, what's up, Leslie? And second of all, yeah, yes, this should be, I mean, think about the things we say in church or in online church or however we gather as UUs. You think about the things we say, this should be a core of who we are without question. And white supremacy gets in the way. You know, I want to let Jova in. I want to think about the second part of your question, Leslie, but this is one of the big issues of our time. And for us to sit on the sidelines, to derail the conversations, however well-intentioned, it's just not the time. Things are too urgent, things are too pressing, and if we're going to say the things we say about our principles and values, then that means things. And otherwise, we're just saying empty words, and I'm not interested in that. But more importantly, I don't believe that at our core, that's really who we are, people who want to be on the sidelines. I just think that, again, fear and confusion and the lies we've been told get in our way. So, Jova.
I think that it is really, I'm echoing. Oh, better now. Okay. Thank you. I think that it's so important that we prioritize this as Unitarian Universalists. I think that we would be not living our lives in a just and responsible way if we don't do this work, whatever that looks like. Again, it doesn't, just because I'm in the streets doesn't mean that's everybody's cup of tea. And I do agree with what Kenny says. There are several ways to enter this movement. I think that I don't want to see white supremacy replicated in my church. I'm just going to say that very bluntly. I think that church is a place where we demand humanity for all people, particularly Unitarian Universalist Church. And so if we are going to give a call to humanity, then that means that we have to do the work in challenging white supremacy. And so that means challenging ourselves and our own privileges, right, and our own fears. And so I think there are people who feel like I can't do this work unless I have Black people or people of color's permission to do this work. And so I also want to challenge that. I think at the core of it, yes, there is a racialized experience, 110% sure. I'm not trying to spout any colorblind rhetoric. But what I am saying is that as humans, it is our responsibility to fight for each other's lives. Mm-hmm. And that inherently means challenging white supremacy and challenging white privilege.
Yeah. To build on Joe's point, I think there's a way for white folks to enter this, right? That sometimes what gets in the way is the way that white voices, white men especially, but white voices in general are valued and respected. And so it's hard to enter into these spaces and say like, oh, well, we want you here, but we don't want you to take over. And I think that's a struggle for people, even people who mean well. and sometimes especially for people who mean well. So what I hear from Black activists doing this work all over the country is that white folks are needed. You're needed. It's sometimes, especially in those spaces with a lot of voices of color, because when I enter a room, the room is no longer all white inherently, and there's work that needs to be done in those white spaces. So please don't think that this is our job. It is our job. We've taken it on, but it's also your job. And without that, things can't change. It can't change just from us, just from Jova, myself, and others. It takes all of us.
I would also add that I think it is our responsibility not to tokenize the voices of Black people and people of color, which is why I think it is important to work for white folks to work with other white folks, for people of color to work with other people of color, Black folks to work with Black folks, etc., and then for us to engage with each other. Because I think a lot of in tokenizing folks, because that means that the work is coming from a place of guilt instead of a place of love. And so I think if we can challenge our own guilt, right? Someone also is not muted yet.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If someone can press *6, if folks cannot unmute themselves, we're just going to have Jova and Kenny speak, and I will read more questions. Thank you.
So if we can really challenge ourselves to come from that place of love, then we won't be doing this tokenization thing. And I think somebody said, what does it look like to, somebody asked me the other day, what does it actually look like to do this work without the guilt? And I think it looks like putting people's lives first and people's stories first. And yeah, other white folks saying, like, I feel as a white person that blank instead of this Black person told me blank. Like those.
What? We got a DJ in the house. Okay. Well, Jova, I wanted to build on that guilt point because it's something I get asked about a lot too. And what I remind people of is that we didn't ask for this system, and a lot of times white people will say that as a reason to do nothing. It's like, I didn't ask for my privilege, so I'm just going to sit back and use it anyway. Well, okay, fine, but I think if we release ourselves from guilt, it should actually inspire us to act, because even though we didn't ask for this, but it's the system of white supremacy affects us all. It affects my family of Black folks. It affects white families. And I think it frees us. It frees us to act out of love, as I see someone on the side says, Carol. It says that it frees us to act from a place of love. I love that.
So I know there's more questions, and if you have one that we haven't yet gotten to, please retype it. There's been a whole lot of great comments. And I will just say that I know that audio has gone in and out a little bit for folks. This will be recorded, and there's been a ton of great resources mentioned both by Jova and Kenny and in the chat box. So we will do our best with Standing on the Side of Love to compile everything that's been said today. We've been taking a lot of notes, and we'll have access to all the links that you all have shared with each other in the chat box. So we will do our best to get that out in an email. So if there's a lot of good stuff coming out, if you don't have time to sort of catch everything, we will do our best to sort of get it back out there. Okay, so let's see. There may have been a question that has popped up that you guys have seen that you want to ask. I know there was a question about mentoring from Lori in Indianapolis, I believe, and the role of white folks and mentoring youth of color. And a couple of people seconded wanting to hear a response on that.
All right.
So I think that's a really important question. I think that, and this is really, I'm speaking from a Jova place right now, so I just want to say that. I think that oftentimes, hold on one second. Oops. Sorry. I'm Sorry, well, I'm in my youth media lab, so one of them just walked in. Sorry about that. So I think I think that white folks being mentors, I think that's fine. That's great. Be mentors. But I also think being a mentor requires a certain responsibility to find folks who identify in certain categories with your teams, right? So, for example, if you're mentoring a bunch of teams of color, find resources for those teams. Get somebody else involved to participate in that who's of color. Inherently acknowledge that, okay, I'm white, so this thing that you're telling me about, I don't totally understand. And owning that. I think youth are very aware when they're telling their stories that this person probably doesn't get it. I'm telling them because I trust them because they're my mentor and maybe they can provide me with a resource so that I can have extra support, right? So taking on a role of being an advocate, taking on a role of finding those resources, encouraging students to look for folks who have similar identities who can speak to the issues that they're talking about. And I think one thing that I really used to bug me as a youth was when white folks would try to tell me about my experience. And I would be like, how can you tell me about my experience as a woman of color? And so really steering clear of things like, well, it's like that because, and from a place of, as a white person, I have seen this. This is a person who can be a resource to you, or I hear your experience. Please tell me more. Are things that are super duper helpful. I think that we live in a very diverse and complex world, and there are so many good folks in this world who are white, who are wanting to do the good work. So it's really redefining mentorship and looking at it as a way to gain resources for your youth, as a way to advocate for them.
Yeah, and what I would add is that so much of this that maybe we haven't talked about as much is white people taking up space. And by that, I don't mean physical space, although sometimes, but it's space when in question and answer sessions at a forum or, who knows what it is. It's because what this movement is about is allowing space for youth of color, especially to find their own voices, to find our own voices. And I think true mentorship is taking up less space and encouraging others to take more. So I think being a mentor can be great. I have white mentors myself and have throughout my life, but it's the ones who have resisted that white supremacy urge, I would say, to tell me how it is and encourage me instead to tell them how it is for me. And the other thing I want to mention very briefly is that white people get to be judged on their own merits in this society. And sadly, so often what a Black person in New Jersey does somehow reflects badly on me. And, that's a really unfortunate part of what we're dealing with. And what I would say is another great thing white folks can do is to judge people on their own merits. And by that, and what by their own words is, you heard two Black people speak of our experiences, and to not say, therefore, I know how it is for Black people because I listened to Jova and Kenny for an hour, but rather to say, I heard their experiences, and there's truth in what they are saying for them and for some others. And so I'm inspired to act and not to tell all the other Black people I know, this is how it is. So that's just what I would add. Thank
you. So if we have time for maybe about one other question, if anyone has something that wasn't answered, thank you so much. I want to sort of echo there's so much gratitude pouring into the chat box from family members, from folks just all over the country who are so grateful for what you all have shared. And we will end this call, pretty much on time. So let's see. I'm not sure if I'm seeing any more questions come in. We got to almost all of them, and I do apologize if there was a burning question that you had that we skipped, but just tons of gratitude pouring in. And I want to echo all the gratitude that's coming in. So wait, Kenny's saying don't don't leave yet. Do you have? I would love to.
No, they're thanking us already. Like we're not done yet. Yeah.
They've been thanking you since like minute 10 or so. So the gratitude's just been pouring in. So I want to hand it to both of you to leave us with any parting words or any go forth and calls to action.
Well, you want to go first, Jova?
You can go first. I started.
Okay.
But...
All right. Yes, I do. And first, I want to say again that engagement is an action. It's not enough just to educate ourselves, but it is an action. The most vicious thing to this is silence, white silence, but really silence for many of us. You know, I think about 50 years ago when MLK gave the eulogy for James Reed. He said something similar at the eulogy for Jimmy Lee Jackson, that he wasn't just killed. They weren't just killed by individuals. They were killed by the system which produced those individuals. They were killed by the system of silence and of comfort. And so when I read those eulogies now, I see it's up to us. This movement doesn't have an MLK, and I don't think it really wants one. It doesn't want one person to tell the whole country how to be. Instead, it has 10 people here and 20 young Black people there and 15 middle-aged white folks in this place. And what I see is it takes all of us. And to me, that's encouraging. I'm encouraged when I see that because it means that we all really can change the system, that our actions do matter, that our actions do make a difference. And together, I believe as Unitarian Universalists, as people of faith, I believe that we can make a difference. And it takes us being willing to show up and not lead. It takes us being willing to show up and listen. It takes us being willing to show up and pay attention to the voices of people 20, 30, 40, 50 years younger than we are. But we can do it because it's right there in our values, it's right there in our hearts, and it's right there in our souls. So thank you for engaging. Thank you for loving. Thank you for continuing on this road because it will take all of us, and I believe we can do it.
Thank you for that, Kenny. I agree with all of that. All of us or none is what we say. All of us or none. It will definitely take all of us, or none of us will be free. And so I think it's accepting the fact that we are not free. None of us are free. We're not. Mm-hmm. And so how can we be free? And I think I say that from an intergenerational standpoint. I think we can learn from our elders just as our elders can learn from young folks. I think us in who identifies young adult can learn from youth, just that they can learn from us, etc. I think having the conversation is so important. Doing research on who's doing the work in your local communities. It cannot just be about UUs working with UUs. We've got to work with everybody. And so do that research. Hop on the internet, phone a friend. I'm sure Standing on the Side of Love probably has some resources. Get involved. Do political education. Read a lot of books. Watch interviews with James Baldwin, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer.
Yeah.
Listen to Ashley Lord. These are people who can inspire you. And again, find out, okay, I want to get involved, but I'm really passionate about climate justice. Do the work of climate justice and figure out how that intersects with Black life. Environmental racism is real and it's happening. And I think the last thing I want to say is, especially when you go back to your churches, I hope you tell them about this webinar. I hope you talk about it. I hope that you present on it. I hope that you encourage them to do the work of finding out what's happening locally and getting those folks activated. I think we have to listen to each other more and again, not tokenize the experience, but look inward to our own experience to come from a place of love.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's really at the core. Do this from a place of love because love will guide you through anything, including fear.
Beautiful. There were some more really great questions that came through, and I'm tempted to get to them, but I also really want to honor time commitments. So one thing that we can do is also move some of this conversation to Facebook in the comments when we share the recording. And Jova and Kenny, maybe as you have time later in the week, we won't ask you to stay now, but if folks want to continue the questions, and not just with you two, with each other and with the community that's here, with all these leaders who have joined the call today. So I really wanted to just thank you one more time for this deep spiritual work that you are doing and that we hope to do with you. And I'm going to start to choke up now. I so appreciate what you're doing. So thank you. And thank you all for being with us.
I've seen so many good questions on the side, and please reach out to me. I love talking to folks about this. I'm putting myself out there as a Black person doing this work, not as please just ask all Black people, but please come to me. I love having conversations with UUs about this stuff.
I know that there is a network of UUs of color, Black UUs who are doing this work, and really tap into that. We've been around for a long time. We're here. We're everywhere. We want to talk.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that, thank you and goodbye, everyone. And we will continue the conversation in many places, in many ways.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.